is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we will be bringing you all things social studies, history, geopolitics, both past and present, for the next hour. We will be doing this is our first part of our usual weekend live stream Q&A, Ask Me Anything, where you can ask me about any historical topics that you are interested in, any social studies, social sciences, geopolitics, both past and present. We were supposed to get started at 8 p.m. Eastern, but unfortunately some scheduling errors and then technical difficulties kept me from doing the live stream at 5 or at 6 on the West Coast. So we're starting at 7 on the West Coast. I know it's late on the East Coast and in Europe, but that is not going to stop us from bringing you some, hopefully, quality history content. So dropping topics in the chat, comments, ideas, questions you might have about different historical topics would be absolute pleasure, as we do this every Friday night and Saturday night. It's a two-part weekend live Q&A. Start off your weekend on the right way on Friday nights and keep it going before you go out and party on Saturday nights by asking some history questions, learning about some historical topics. You can bring up any different events, historical figures, historical topics you want to bring up, geography, social sciences. It's what we do here on the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. We started this live stream back in the summer following the success of the channel. I've always been amazed by the successes of the channel, how we started off small, and just have always had a really good community of people who have always given good feedback and enjoyed a lot of the content that we have been able to produce on different historical topics in different historical ways at different historical times. And these have been we had a really fun time. We have been going since February, so it's been about 9 months we've been doing this, and it's been a lot of fun. We started President's Day weekend of February. I just decided to do a couple random shorts on my, just using my YouTube app. Didn't know how they worked, didn't know the difference between a 15-second short and a 60-minute short. So, but just threw up a couple of things, and the next morning I was amazed that a few hundred people had actually watched one of my shorts, that there was a market for people, an area for people who were interested in history, and there was a community of people who wanted to learn about history, and eventually found out that these people wanted to be friendly neighborhood historians. Liking and subscribing, it's as easy to become a friendly neighborhood historian as it's ever been before. Hello, Otter, good to see you. And so I was amazed to find out that people wanted to learn history, and not only did they want to learn history, they wanted to learn history here with us at the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and we grew quickly, and we are now up to over 5,400 subscribers. The goal is 6,000 by the end of the year. We are over 90% of the way there, so please like, subscribe, follow the channel, and drop some comments, some questions you have about history in the chat, and I will be happy to address them and answer them for the next hour or so. We are starting very, very late, as I said, but not to worry. We've got some people here, and we're going to have some good talks and everything. Hello, welcome, good to see you. Hello, thank you for joining us. This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, where we will be talking about all things history, social sciences over the next hour or so. If you have any topics or questions you want to ask related to the social sciences, drop them in the chat, and I will get to them in a timely manner. It is my pleasure to bring as much history as I possibly can, Spencer. I really appreciate you being here, so thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Where are you joining us from? It's great to see people. We have people who join us in the live stream all throughout all the world, and it's always fun to see. We've got people right now in the United States, where I'm coming from. It's in the evening time, but we've got people, of course, across the world who are waking up to their Saturday mornings with the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. Really, really appreciate all of that. And if you want to be a friendly neighborhood historian, it's as easy as liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. Really appreciate it. I've got long-form content at least once a week, and I've got short-form content daily, all sorts of different topics and themes and series that I do. And we started the live streams back in May, and they've been very successful, and eventually people wanted to keep asking questions. So they asked me if I could do Sundays as well. So we started doing Saturdays and Sundays, and then eventually branched off into having Friday night and Saturday night live streams. Start your weekend right on Friday nights, keep it going well on Saturday nights, and then Sundays in the afternoon, join me for the live stream lecture. I will be doing a special live stream this coming Wednesday about the history of Thanksgiving, another live stream lecture. So you get two live stream lectures this week, one on Sunday and one on Wednesday, figuring out the times for that and all of that stuff. So it seems like we've already got a great question from the wonderful Otter. Okay, politics aside, can we talk about Reagan's presidency? Why does he get blamed too much today? Well, a lot of people, I think, there's a recency bias about presidents that seems to be this pattern where a lot of people think American presidents are really, really good right after they finish. They leave office with high approval ratings. The country seems strong. They had a confident message. And then people start to reevaluate and go back and say, hey, things weren't as great as they thought. I mean, Lyndon Johnson had a very good reputation, especially for his domestic policies after his presidency ended. But a lot of people have gone back and looked at that and looked at how Vietnam went and have started to think that Johnson probably wasn't that successful of a president and probably wasn't that good of a president. And therefore, they've revised their understanding of Johnson's presidency and seen him in a more negative light, although successful with certain things. And I think that just people watching the results trickle down, no pun intended, from Reagan's presidency, a lot of people have kind of revised what happened, and there's been more of an official understanding that sees Reagan in less great ways than was originally thought. But at the time, the United States had all the momentum coming out of the Cold War. It seemed like the United States was really strong. It seemed like Reagan had caused all of that to happen, basically by implementing a center-right policies that pushed America to the right. And so I think that's a big reason, Otter, that Reagan gets blamed a lot today, is that the recency bias has worn off, and a lot of people want to look at Reagan's presidency and see the problems with it and see how things could have been better without him, or what kind of damages he did. Things that were overlooked when he was president seemingly have gotten more attention now. He didn't reduce government spending. Inflation would have continued, and things would be drastically different today. Well, he did actually spend quite a big amount, but he did bring America out. So a lot of people think that Reagan is responsible for the recession of the 70s and the 80s. That's not really true. Reagan is the one who ended that recession through some of his economic policies, but he basically had this philosophy of how to defeat the Soviet Union in the midst of the Cold War. And the way he wanted to defeat the Soviet Union was by basically outspending them on the military front while also embracing open markets and strengthening the U.S. economy. Reagan was successful in doing both of these things, but he drove up huge deficits in order to pay for all of the military spending that he wanted to do. Because he did all of this, you had a lot of problems with future deficits. And when you spend a lot of money, obviously you're going to cause a rise in the deficit. You're going to cause a rise in government spending. You're going to force the government to print more money, and you are going to see an increase in inflation. So Reagan did roll back regulations, cut some government spendings, but he counterbalanced that by really leaning into heavy military spending in order to outdo the Soviets. But he was very successful in outdoing the Soviets. So Reagan definitely achieved a lot of his goals. It's just a lot of people, I think, look back on Reagan's presidency and say he didn't achieve the goals in the way that he either promised or should have. And so there's a lot of criticisms about Reagan. There's a lot of recency bias that's worn off, and I think that's a big reason why we kind of bash Reagan nowadays. But I think he was a very successful president. I think he is getting into the underrated territory because people have swung so hard against him. And I think that he's got a lot of things going for him. I think he was telegenic. I think he was an excellent communicator. Speaking of presidents who were telegenic and excellent communicators, today is obviously the 61st anniversary of the assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963. I'll be talking about this a little bit on my live stream this coming weekend. This weekend, for the live stream lecture on Sunday afternoon, we will be talking about the history of Ellis Island, the Kennedy assassination, and the first Thanksgiving. We'll be talking more about the history of Thanksgiving on my second live stream lecture, a special on Wednesday afternoon. So please come and join us for that. Yeah, Reagan was able to do a lot that a lot of people didn't think was possible. And the benefits, there were tons of benefits, and there were definitely some drawbacks. And people didn't, I think nowadays are looking more at the drawbacks to Reagan's foreign policy, his aggressive pursuit of destabilizing countries because he didn't want communist governments, things like that. I think that Reagan gets a lot of flack for things that he didn't do. And I think a lot of people who criticize Reagan heavily do not look at where the country was when Reagan took office as opposed to where the country was after Reagan left. I think America was in a much stronger and more confident position and a stronger economic position. And I think the world was in a stronger position when it came to world peace and ending the Cold War by 1989 as opposed to what it was when he became president in 1981. Reagan, the war is good for the economy. The military-industrial complex, when it thrives, America really beefs up its economy. So there's a lot to be said about all of that. Yeah, you are here before Simon. Simon will not be joining us tonight, because that is because it is now. It was supposed to be 2 a.m. when I moved it back to a 6 p.m. West Coast start, but now it is 7 p.m. on the West Coast in the United States, and Simon is asleep and hopefully getting some good rest, and he definitely needs it. And Otter saying Reagan kept telling Congress to reduce spending on Medicare, Medicaid, but they kept, yeah, Reagan had to balance out a Democratic Congress. It's amazing what he could have accomplished had he had conservative Republicans with him. Who knows how much government spending he could reduce? Who knows what that would have done to Medicaid and Medicare and all of these efforts to relieve poverty and give health care to those who desperately needed it. So who knows? There's a lot that Reagan didn't get done, but the fact that he did get that done with a Democratic Congress proves what an effective communicator, how bipartisan he was. Remember, Reagan was the governor of a very liberal state, California, in the late 1960s, and yet he was able to have 2 successful terms there as well. So I think Reagan's ability to communicate, his telegenic nature, his confident messaging, all of these things made him very likable and appealing. And you don't want to be the ones being negative and wagging your finger at somebody who is so charismatic and positive. And so the Republicans in the 2010s fell into this mistake of wagging their finger at President Obama, who was very charismatic and positive and hopeful. And the Democrats didn't fall into this mistake in the 1980s of wagging their finger at Reagan. They were like, well, he may not get everything he wants, but we'll work with him and make sure things go well because we want to look good. He looks good, so we want to work with him on certain things. So, No Step, it's so great to see you. I've been wondering where you've been. I hope you've started that history channel you were telling us about. I want to go and subscribe to it, but it's so good to see you. You always bring such great questions. It's always great to have you in the chat. Otter saying, I think the continuation of FDR policies is what is handicapping the U.S. FDR used these policies to help get us out of the depression, but times have changed. The U.S. needs to evolve, not continue government spending. Yeah, FDR's policies, as we know historically, I mean, it's basically a fact. It's not even debated anymore. Did not end the Great Depression. What is debated is how long did it prolong the Great Depression for? Roosevelt's policies economically were not nearly as successful as a lot of people think that they were. But what did Roosevelt do well that Reagan did well and Obama did well and Kennedy did well and a lot of presidents have done well, even if a kind of a fake it if you make it, even if their policies don't necessarily work? Well, these men were very, very good at communicating their message and appearing handsome, charismatic, and speaking to people about hope in an optimistic way without actually being able to always back up what they were able to do. And the results of that, they were able to make people feel better about themselves. And Roosevelt definitely did that to the extreme during his presidencies, particularly during the Great Depression. Otter saying Carter doesn't get enough flack as he should be getting. He should have cut FDR's policies, but kept increasing. Yeah, Carter definitely was in over his head, didn't know what he was doing as president, and really didn't know how to handle the economy. And neither did he know how to handle foreign policy. And I think that Carter basically was a stay the course guy. If things had not been so topsy-turvy, both in the Middle East and in the American economy when Carter had become president, he might have ended up being a very successful president. But he was notorious for taking on too much. He was in way over his head. He didn't have a chief of staff because he wanted to do everything. And when you are expanding government by creating more agencies and you are already way in over your head, it's not going to be a pretty solution. Hello, welcome. Good to see you, Elisa. Yeah, Luis, there is definitely some truth that Reagan's policies definitely did benefit the upper class and things like that. But Reagan and his supporters would argue that benefiting upper classes, corporations, and businesses will eventually trickle down and affect the lower classes and help them out. Although it is unfair to say that Reagan's economic plan was as simple as the rich will pay more in taxes, the rich will make more money, and that will eventually find its way down to the lower classes. Reagan really didn't necessarily say that. The phrase trickle down economics has never been used by was never used by Reagan or his economic staff. The idea was that if you grow the economy, you'll see an expansion of business and you'll see more and more people working. And with expansions, you'll see more and more people making money and they will pay taxes on that money. Yeah, No Step. It's been a while, so let me refresh your mind and let me refresh you if you're just joining. Basically, we now do 3 live streams. We do one on Friday evenings, start off your weekend the right way with some friendly neighborhood history. That's a Q&A. And then we do Saturday evenings at 7 p.m. Eastern, and that is another Q&A. And then we do a live stream lecture that will hopefully become the Friendly Neighborhood History Podcast. That's on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern. We do that Sunday afternoon history, and that's me talking about different things. here and tomorrow night it's just going to be a regular Q&A and stuff like that. So that's what we're doing, No Step. We've got 3 live streams now. We have 5,400 subscribers. We are working towards 6,000, a friendly legion of friendly neighborhood historians by the end of the year. That's the goal. Yeah, I think Reagan definitely got a lot of successes, and Spencer's right. Everyone voted for Reagan. Reagan has the last major landslide in U.S. presidential history. His win in 1984. Yeah, global. That's right. He called it George H.W. Bush. Actually, a lot of people don't know this, but he ran against Reagan in 1980, and they did not have a good path. But Reagan, who's very good at bringing people to the table, made him his vice president, united the moderate and conservative wings of the Republican Party, and then worked very closely with Democratic Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill, who he often vehemently disagreed with, but who became one of his closest friends in Washington. Yeah, Saturday 12 to 1. That was the original one where we would do Q&A, and now we're doing that at 7 p.m. Eastern time on Saturdays. And that's still a Q&A. This is a Q&A, and Sunday is the live stream lecture. Luis is saying, I just learned about the trickle-down theory. What do you think could benefit the lower class to balance it out? From what I read, it seems we'd all have to be wealthy to balance it out. Yeah, there's no, if you're asking me how to solve poverty there or lower classes, there's no easy way to say it. From what I understand, something about that makes America particularly unique in its history is social mobility. That social mobility is starting to pinch and contract and become less and less common. But a big thing that has happened, that constantly happens, is that people who are born poor usually do not die poor, and people who are born rich usually do not die rich. There's a level of social mobility in U.S. economics that is unforeseen. You also have huge, vast wealth disparities between the ultra-rich and the ultra-poor. You have huge amounts of wealth in the United States created by Americans, and you have vast sums of poverty, whereas in other countries you may find poor and wealthy, but you won't find super rich or super poor. So that's something that's going on there. Friday, it's 8 p.m. on, if you're talking about Pacific time, No Step, it's 5 p.m. on Fridays, 4 p.m. on Saturdays, 1 p.m. on Sundays, and go 3 hours ahead for the Eastern Standard. And yeah, Sundays is the live stream lecture, and that's at 1 p.m. Pacific time. And I'm doing a special live stream lecture on Wednesday, next Wednesday, for Thanksgiving, giving a history on Thanksgiving. I'll be making a video and releasing it in the channel as well, a long-form video about that. But yeah, so check that out. It's great to have you back with us, No Step. But anyways, so this is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel. If you enjoy what you're learning about, if you enjoy these kinds of topics, be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Again, the goal is 6,000 subscribers by the end of the year. And if you have any historical topics, questions, social science related things, geopolitics, both past and present, you want to learn about or you want to ask about, drop topics and comments in the chat, and I will get to them in a timely manner. Any questions you have, I'm happy to answer them. That's what we do. The Q&As is all about giving back to people. I mean, you guys watch my content all throughout the week, and at the end of the week, I like to bring you guys the chance to ask about questions that you are interested in. Okay, No Step is asking about D-Day. So D-Day is actually, yeah, like as a whole. So D-Day is the beginning of what's called the Normandy campaign, when the United States, Great Britain, and Canada, the Allies, basically invade Normandy in June of 1944. After the Italian campaign that the United States had tried originally with the British, had liberated southern Italy, but ended up in a stalemate in northern Italy between the Americans and the Allies and the Germans in the north. The United States decides to invade France and liberate France from the Nazis, working with the French resistance led by a man whose birthday is today, Charles de Gaulle, the famous president of France. The United States and the Allies, under the command of Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower, the future U.S. president, set up an invasion at different beaches along the northwestern coast of France called Normandy. Now, Normandy is very close to the English Channel. This is where William the Conqueror came almost 1,000 years before this and conquered England. It is very close to England. It's on the coast of France for a reason, and it's the English Channel is not that long. The closest point between France and England, however, is Calais. And The Nazi high command believed that the Allies would land at Normandy because there'd be more space. But Hitler believed that the Allies would actually land at Calais. And so what Eisenhower did was to deceive the Nazis into thinking that he would land at Calais. He actually set up military fortifications, rubber tanks, weapons, models of soldiers, led by General George S. Patton, the same victor from the Italian campaign, and basically gave the Nazis the impression, through reconnaissance and through seeing and through aerial pictures and things like that, that those forces would invade the mainland at Calais. And so the Nazi high command was right and Hitler was wrong. The Allies invaded at Normandy Beach, and they were at Normandy, and they were on June 6, 1944, and there were several beaches set up. So there were several beaches that were fighting. The most famous is Omaha. That's where the Americans were. There was also Sword. That's where the Juno, where the Canadians were, and Sword, where the British were. And basically, the fighting took all day and all night for the Americans and the British to get a foothold on the beach head. But it actually took the entire rest of June for the Allies to take over the rest of Normandy, conquer it, and then by September, they liberated Paris and France from the Nazi control. So, it's a great topic, but basically, a lot of people feel that the Nazis got duped by the Allies, and the Allies were able to trick them, and that's how the fortifications were not strong enough at Normandy to resist the Allied invasion, and the Allies were able to successfully get in and go all the way and create a beachhead. And from there, they launched continual invasions and campaigns and attacks until they were eventually able to win the Normandy invasion later that month. So a lot of people don't know that D-Day isn't just one day. It took an entire month for the Allies to actually successfully kick the Germans out of the Normandy province, and it would take the rest of the summer, really, for them to get France liberated from the Nazis with help from those resistance fighters and, of course, Charles de Gaulle. The night before the D-Day invasions on June 5th, paratroopers and supplies were already being airlifted in so that the Allies would have backup and reconnaissance and spies and things like that, who were already disturbing German fortifications. But basically, this was brutal carnage most of the day, and many, many men died. I think tens of thousands of men died just that day on both sides. And the Germans just weren't prepared and weren't ready because they were deceived about what the Allies were going to do. Throughout World War II, the Allies were successful at duping the Germans many times. You have a story behind Imitation Game, the code cracking of the British. You have the deception of Calais instead of Normandy, and George Patton, a U.S. general, the best U.S. general arguably in the war, basically setting up a fake army and fooling the Nazi spies and reconnaissance and espionage into thinking the Allies would attack at Calais. You have the Navajo code talkers, who were basically able to use a code against the Japanese that the Japanese could not figure out. And the code was obviously the Navajo language. And the Navajo code talkers were able to send messages that the Japanese could never decode because they thought it was encrypted when it was actually just the language of the Navajo people. So there's just so much about reconnaissance and spy work in World War II, and I don't know enough about it to go into a vast description and detail, but actually espionage and trickery was how the Allies won the Battle of Normandy, and were able to successfully invade and liberate France from the Nazis in the summer and early fall of 1944. Thank you, Luis. I really appreciate you gaining more knowledge and liking and subscribing. You are a friendly neighborhood historian. Congratulations. Yeah, I've seen the movie Saving Private Ryan. I mean, I've heard stories about World War II veterans who went and saw that movie, and with like younger family members, and their family members are looking at them and their heads are down, looking at the ground, because the brutal carnage, the explosions, all of that, the shell fire, it was so, I mean, this was all bringing back post-traumatic stress disorder that they had buried deep in their subconsciouses for decades, and they're watching this movie 50 years after it actually happened. Commonly, you couldn't hear, I mean, these were brutal, awful things. I know I just gave a quick historian's description of what happened, but I mean, imagine you're being shot at as soon as your transport leaves, and you land on this beach, and there is just bullets flying everywhere, machine guns, people shooting from foxholes where they have a lot of coverage, and it's really hard to aim at them and take them out. And you don't have any and it's a beach. It's not like tons of rocks and escarpments. It's not like you're fighting in the jungle. You don't have cover. You are running away, trying to outrun bullets whizzing by you everywhere, heavy shell fire, and you are hoping that that bombs and that your forces that are already there will be able to set up the right, machine guns or artillery that can, or things like that that can blow away the enemy. I mean, and imagine this: you're standing next to your friend, and you look over and he's there, and then you look again and he's gone. In World War I and World War II, they start counting what are called missing. So there's killed, captured, or wounded. Those are the common casualties in warfare. In modern warfare, they start counting missing. Missing doesn't mean he deserted and ran away or he went to go to the bathroom. Missing is your buddy is standing next to you and he is gone. He's there 1 second, he's gone the next, and there is no trace of any of his remains. He is literally blown to bits by heavy shell fire, machine gun fire. Something has just completely eviscerated him, and you have no way of telling where he went. You have nothing left over. There is no trace of him remaining. So that is a new category of casualty, and this was happening all the time during World War II, and definitely was happening on those beaches. Sword, Juno, Omaha, and there's two more. And this is not just the Americans, this is the British and the Canadians as well, too. Once again, something to understand about the world wars is that when an empire like the British Empire, the French Empire, the German Empire in World War I, or the Russian Empire in World War I participates, all of their colonies, all of their lands around the world participate, and their soldiers are fighting. So when Britain fights in World War II, Canada joins for the ride, because Canada is still very much, at this point, it's a dominion of Great Britain. It's not fully independent, though it has its own government. It's still tied to Britain and always loyal to Great Britain. And if Great Britain goes to war, Canada goes to war too. Yeah, and that is what makes that movie so accurate. That gore and bloodshed and destruction is what makes that movie such an accurate one. It takes off a lens of glory, and it shows the carnage and bare bones brutality of that war. Otter's asking, can we talk about Patton? Any interesting facts about him and his accomplishments? Yeah, Patton's an interesting figure. Obviously, I think most of us have probably seen the movie with George C. Scott, who won the Oscar for playing him in 1970. Patton's a very fascinating man. He is considered a wildflower. He is considered a loose cannon. He is not a consistent, reliable general, but he's an amazingly good commander. He is the first American general to really understand tank warfare, and he's able to out Rommel Rommel. Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, is the Nazis' best commander in World War II, probably, and also he is the Desert Fox because of his fighting in North Africa. He was able to consistently humiliate the British during World War II. It was Patton who was able to use Rommel's tactics against him in tank warfare in the North African desert and eventually humiliate and defeat him. Patton is a very interesting guy. He's extremely aggressive and bullish. He's able to push his forces into northern Italy in 1944, and at the very end of 1944, as the Americans and British and now the French are trying to push into Germany, the Germans do a counteroffensive where they bulge into the side of the American forces on the German border, and so it becomes known as the Battle of the Bulge. The Allies need someone to relieve them because the Germans are overwhelming them in a blitzkrieg. They're basically doing their classic blitzkrieg against the US and the British. And the Allies rely on Patton to get his tank brigades and his forces up to the German border in order to put pressure on the Germans to relieve the offensive. And Patton is able to do that successfully. There's actually a town of soldiers who are Australian who are able to hold on to the town and resist the Nazi counteroffensive and during the Battle of the Bulge, and basically embarrass the Third Reich's Wehrmacht. But Patton's bringing relief and soldiers getting there just in time, basically a blitzkrieg of his own through northern Italy and the Alps into France, the French-German border, is able to relieve the pressure on the Allies and allows them to eventually win the Battle of the Bulge, which, like the Battle for Normandy, is not a one-time thing, a one-day thing, or even a one-week thing. It's a battle that lasts months, and it is the final decisive offensive in the war. So, Patton's a fascinating character. At the end of World War II, Patton believes that the United States' new enemy is the Soviet Union. He's correct about that, and he proposes that the United States invade the Soviet Union, continue the war, and destroy the communist government of Stalin. This is seen as madness after all the suffering and destruction, the environmental damage, and the loss of life on both sides. Starting another world war just doesn't seem right to a lot of people, and Patton's idea is kind of shelved. It would have been very interesting to see had it's in a huge what if in history if the United States had continued to prosecute the war, this time against the Soviets. So I don't know what would have happened. I don't know that the United States and the other allies would have been able to overwhelm the Soviets and bring them into submission. These guys have been able to withstand the Germans, literally fighting over Stalingrad and Leningrad for 3 years, almost 1,000 days. They would have probably been able to withstand American invasion as well. But Patton died shortly thereafter in a car accident. He became a legend because of his aggressiveness, his basically his bully spirit, and his supreme confidence in his military tactics, which were often very astute and very, very good. Yeah, being on that beach, headed towards that, when you know that you could easily get killed, and you could easily get not only killed but blown to bits, and no one will ever find anything that remains of you, and you are under heavy shell fire, and you are just daring death to take you any moment. It's just one of the scariest feelings. I mean, I can understand fighting in a forest or a certain area where you have some sort of barrier protection. Invading from a beachhead, you have no protection except your allied paratroopers behind their lines, spies, and any aerial coverage you can get. You are fighting for every single inch and trying to make sure that none of those bullets whizzing by hit you. So yeah, and PTSD amongst World War II veterans is not talked about a lot, but it's definitely a real thing. There was a lot of compartmentalization, and a lot of these men kind of just putting it away and pretending that it didn't happen and trying to just raise their family separate of it. Yeah, that is true. Some did actually die. Heart attacks. What's the deal, though? This is the Friendly Neighborhood History Channel, and if you have any questions about social sciences or social studies or history, geography, politics, geopolitics, past and present, drop them in the chat. That's what we do every Friday night and Saturday night. That's the deal, McLevin. Yeah, invading Russia is suicidal. Not if you're the Mongols or the Poles. In the 1200s, the Mongols invaded and actually conquered what was called the Kievan Rus for 2.5 centuries and basically made them their puppet state until Ivan the Great, the first real Russian ruler who ruled over an independent country of Russia, stood up to them in 1480 and kicked them out, stopped paying taxes. And then the Poles invade in the early 1600s, and they get all the way to Moscow before a counter-offensive from the Russians basically whips them. And funny because Poland is going to be whipped by the Russians over and over again after almost conquering Russia. But yeah, Napoleon failed. The Germans failed with Operation Barbarossa in World War II, and I think the Allies got the idea that if you're going to beat the Soviets, and the Russians, you're going to have to do it slow and steady, and that's definitely the Cold War, and that brings us all the way back to Reagan, who was the first U.S. president in some time, who basically said the goal of this isn't just to survive or to thrive on our own. The goal is to destroy the Soviet Union, and that was Reagan's big calling card, and that was a huge risk he took with foreign policy. Rather than talking about appeasement and continual peace talks, Reagan went full blast when he said, basically, we win, they lose, they are the evil empire, make no mistake about it. Reagan was extremely bullish in a way Patton was, but rather than appease the Soviets, which appeasement had been tried with Hitler and failed miserably, the idea, rather than you live in your area and we live in our area, the idea was you surrender and lose, and no ifs, ands, or buts. We win, you lose. It's that simple. That's our strategy. Hello, Chuck. Good to see you. Thank you for joining us. Otter, we only had one atomic bomb left after the Japanese. Interestingly enough, I think that one of the reasons we didn't invade the Soviet Union was because of how much it had taken to get the Japanese to surrender. Making Russia, which is a lot larger and has more people, surrender would have been far harder to do. We only had we had 3 atom bombs. At the end of World War II, the United States did. They used one of them on Hiroshima, one of them on Nagasaki, and there was a third one, and they were ready to drop it, I think, on Tokyo. But the idea was we would have had to use that one and maybe a couple. It depends on how fast we're producing them and how long the war would have gone on. We were surprised that the Soviets got the bomb as quickly as they did in 1949, just 4 years after the United States did. So I do know that the United States was trying to make deals with Stalin, and Stalin was continually demanding more land to be under communist influence and more resources and more supplies from the Allies. And Truman, when he was president, was in talks with Soviet generals about how the Soviets could possibly invade Japan. And in one of these meetings, an aide walked into him and said, "We have it," meaning we have the bomb. And Truman stood up immediately and said, "These negotiations are over," and walked out. So the United States, so Truman proved very quickly and very early on that he didn't want to deal with the Soviets. He didn't want them to get whatever they wanted. So I don't think they would have if they had invaded, but it's an interesting thought. President Eisenhower, again, former Allied Supreme Commander during World War II, believed that it was best to use them and to build them up in order to use them as an incentive not to have a land war. Rather, if you can use a nuclear bomb and destroy a city, you're gonna think twice about invading another country if they have a nuclear weapon. And so, although he also did build the international highway system, the interstate, in order to transport military supplies and soldiers more quickly if the Soviets did invade the United States. So the freeway system in the United States was created by Eisenhower based on the Germans who had invented it under the Nazis, the Autobahn, was a way to get ready in case the Soviets did invade the United States. So Seth's saying Russia versus the Ottomans. Yeah, the Russians and Turkey fought many times. The Russians, I think, only lost one of those wars, and they had like a dozen wars over like a 2.5 century period. And they only lost, I think, one of them. They stalemated on a couple others, but the Russians usually were dominant, especially later on in the 19th century as the as the Ottomans started to decline. Obviously, the major loss would be the Crimean War in the 1850s when the British and the French came to bail out the Ottomans. But usually, the Russians, especially in the 19th century, kicked the Ottomans' butts over and over, taking more and more land in the Balkans, the Transcaucasus region, and of course Crimea, which is why the Russians think they deserve Crimea today, by the way. So anyways, so that's a little bit about World War II, George S. Patton, D-Day, what would have happened had the United States invaded the Soviet Union, why you don't want to invade the Soviet Union, a little bit on the presidencies of Reagan, Carter, Truman, and FDR. So some fun and enjoyable stuff there that I hope you guys find interesting. Let's see, if you are enjoying what you are learning about, again, like and subscribe. It's never been easier to become a friendly neighborhood historian. You don't have to go to Patreon. You don't have to give me a bunch of money, although that would be nice. We're trying to get 6,000 loyal friendly neighborhood historian subscribers by the end of the year. That's our goal. But I really appreciate all the feedback. And let's see, do we have any other topics, questions anyone would like to bring up? History-related things. We'll be here for another about half hour or so. We got a very late start today. We were supposed to start at 8 p.m. That's when we normally start on Fridays, but I'm so glad we were able to start when we were because we got No Step on Snake back, and it's so great to see you, No Step. But we're starting at 10 p.m. Eastern. I know it's late. People are already out partying and doing weekend things, so maybe that's why we have a thinner crowd, but we've got a good crowd. Yeah, I don't know much about Twitch. I don't have Twitch. I have thought about going live maybe on X or Instagram. I do have those handles available, and maybe just talking some history there, doing a Q&A there. I have Rumble. I upload videos there once in a great while. A couple times a week, I'll go on Instagram or Facebook or X and put up either posts or updates, or I'll put up videos. But yeah, that would actually be really, really cool. Yeah, that would be cool. I should look into that. People have told me about Discord. They told me about Twitch and all the different things I can do there. I know that's more for gamers and stuff. I have thought about live streaming and just talking about random history stuff while playing like an RTS because I like those real-time strategy video games or something like that. I could do a World War II live stream where I'm playing Call of Duty, like Call of Duty 2, which is like the best Call of Duty game, which is all about World War II. Something like that. I mean, I think there's a field for history, and I think military history and war history really stands out, and a lot of people learn a lot of history from like violent video games. And so I think that's why history mainly, especially these days, is appealing more and more to men because men are more likely to play those video games. So I could do a live stream where I'm playing Call of Duty 2 and explaining different parts of World War II. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Yeah, maybe I'd have to repurchase the game because I used to have it on my old PC. I have done a couple screencasts that have been fun. I might do a screencast for that, like an hour of me just playing video games and talking history. That'd be fun. I could do one. Stronghold Crusader was always one of my favorites, or Stronghold. I could talk about the Middle Ages and the Crusades in those. That would be a lot of fun. I sometimes use those music in my videos. Middle Ages, Crusades, that'd be fun. The Total War games, Rome Total War was a favorite of mine. I could do a stream about Roman history while talking about Total War. I have an entire series of shorts on Roman emperors. So go check those out. I have a series of shorts on female rulers, the presidential election. I realized that the politics of 2024 in America were really, really interesting to a lot of people. So I did a live stream. So I did a series of videos about that. I did one about the czars of Russia, the kings and queens of England. I've done several of these series that I put into playlists. The U.S. presidents. Check those out when you get the chance. They're a lot of fun. I really enjoy doing them. But yeah, it'd be cool to take that knowledge and put it into a stream, a live stream of me doing video games. So you get the video game fun and you get me talking about these things. Oh yeah, Steph's asking, what part of history have you been obsessing over lately? I have been looking at a lot of. I've been busy, but mainly the history I've been focusing on and trying to get more into in the channel is women's history, because I'm doing that series on women rulers. And I've been trying to look at stories of women in history who were significant rulers in different areas and locales. So I did a video on Ravanola the First, who was the very what's the word, capricious queen of Madagascar. Madagascar, believe it or not, was an African kingdom for centuries and was actually settled half by Africans and half by people from Polynesia and Oceania. Interestingly, and India. So there's a lot to go there. So I'm trying to look more into women's history, find examples of women leading, and especially in non-Western contexts. If you had asked me 6 months ago who Bhutta Benazir was, I would not know. But I can tell you she's the first woman to lead a Muslim majority country in Pakistan in the 1980s, and she was assassinated for her efforts at ending radical Islam. So I'm focusing on women's history. I'm focusing herstory, if you want to call it that. I'm doing a video tonight about today is the anniversary of the fall. Speaking of a conservative leader from the 80s who was anti-communist, Reagan couldn't have gotten as far as he did without the help of Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of Great Britain, who had already started conservative economic policies, more open market policies during the 80s before Reagan had started. She became one of his closest allies and confidants. Today is the anniversary of when her government fell in 1990, so I think my Powerful Women video today should be about Margaret Thatcher. So I'm trying to look at women, I'm trying to look at their influence in history, and I'm finding a lot of amazing things. I mean, women, even when they are not ruling directly, have a subtlety about the way they rule and influence things that men just never have in history. And so women who are not men who are not rulers in history don't have a huge impact in when you consider royalty. But when you look at females who are not direct rulers of a country, they have an exorbitant amount of influence over a country's political affairs, even when they're not directly ruling. Eleanor of Aquitaine being able to influence Henry II, and then first Louis VIII of France, then Henry II of England, then turn Henry's sons against him and cause basically a civil war in England, where she got what she wanted with Richard becoming the king after Henry died. That's an incredible example of a woman controlling things from behind the scenes. So Sophia Palagogus, basically Zoe, a niece of the last Byzantine emperor, basically pushing Ivan III to become the ruler of the Russians after defeating the Mongols. You've got a lot of famous women in history who are from behind the scenes, maybe not doing all of the big decisions and making all of the big things, but they are influencing things in such a certain way that they are changing the course of history while not being the active rulers opposed to their husbands. And that's not to mention all the great women rulers in history who are doing a lot and making a lot happen. Elizabeth I of England, Victoria, Njinga of Angola, women like that, the Empress Dowager in China, women who I still have to get to on that series. I don't think I'm going to finish that series this year. I don't know how I'm going to finish that series, because when you do monarchs, you end at a particular point. I want to turn my attention to French monarchs, because I want to do a series on the French monarchs, but that's going to take a while because I don't know French monarchs like I know English and Russian monarchs. So I've been obsessing. I try to consider myself a historic chameleon, Seth, where I've got one particular form of history, and it's really getting to me right now, and it's really interesting to me right now. I mean, and so whenever I learn about a particular type of history, I absorb that history, and it really becomes, I saturate myself with it and try to learn as much of it as possible. Earlier this year, finishing my master's, I did a particular emphasis on Afghan history and the Great Game, Britain and Russia's competition, what I would call the first Cold War between Britain and Russia for Afghanistan, and Persia, and India. By the way, just as an aside, I believe there's 2 Cold Wars and 3 World Wars, and I've talked about this before. But yeah, history is kind of where I'm settling now and kind of familiarizing myself and trying to learn as much as I possibly can. And I'm enjoying it. It's fun. I'm not. I mean, I'm not super. I'm not going to do disclaimers saying I'm a man or I'm a male identifying person, so I can't. I'm a cisgendered man, so I can't male, so I can't speak on this the way a woman could, and I don't know what it's like the female experience because that's like it. Because no one would ask if I was a woman historian talking about male rulers to say I'm a woman, so I don't know what it's like to be a man. So I'm not going to do that because I don't think that's fair. I don't know what it's like to be a woman. I don't like, but none of us know what it's like to be somebody living in the 1500s, and yet we put ourselves in those places when we talk about history all the time. As I was taught when I was in college, history is a foreign place, a foreign country with different languages, customs, and ideas. So, anyways, Otter's saying, I wonder if you can tap into reacting to the clips of historical movies, such as We Were Soldiers, Saving Private Ryan, Gladiator. I would. I think I can do that with commentary and not go into copyright. I do want to do a series at some point. It would have to be a longer form video, maybe a screencast series, where I talk about the historical inaccuracies. I could do tier lists of historically accurate movies. Like, for instance, Braveheart is not historically accurate. Patriot is not historically accurate. You know, different movies. Sorry, Mel Gibson. Great movies, not historically accurate. I mean, it took me until I did this channel to find out that Braveheart was actually not William Wallace, but Robert the Bruce. Robert the Bruce never betrayed William Wallace, and Edward Longshanks kicked Wallace's butt and was still alive when Wallace was dead. So Seth's saying, history, I like that. I think women rulers are just as good as the men, and even when you look at people like the first ladies of the president, they are, yes, it's amazing. So one of the powerful women, I think that's so true. The first ladies, we don't talk about them enough, but they're still there doing a lot of important things. A great example of this is the late, great Rosalind Carter, whose husband Jimmy just celebrated 100 years, the only American leader to ever pass into a century, and one of the very few heads of state ever to hit triple digits. But she was extremely influential in advocating mental health, nutrition, things like this. Every first lady has a pet project they do. Rosalind Carter had her own staff. She had her own staff meetings and worked on different projects. And several of the women in her staff were advising President Carter. So she was extremely influential, both as the first lady of Georgia and as the first lady of the United States. And we don't talk enough about her and what she did. Yeah, Otter, it's not a bad question to have. There's a lot of questions about the validity of movies because there's not a lot of valid historical movies. Hey, Matt, thank you so much. I hope you're good too. I love history and hearing your channel. Well, I love having you here. I haven't heard you yet, but I love having you here, and that's what matters. Yeah, I think I should tap into that. There's a lot that I want to tap into that I can't always do due to time constraints and work constraints. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Historically accurate things. I mean, I've had a lot of fun reacting and to people being historically inaccurate. And so, I mean, one of my favorite videos I ever did was I did my top 10 Roman emperors video, and it was reacting to a terrible AI generated list. I don't do AI stuff on this channel for that reason. So yeah. Yeah, I really do like that. I think that we could get some more views and it could push us towards monetization. So I like that, Otter. You're a great idea, guy. Matt's saying her and Jimmy got together when they were 17. Yeah, she was 17. He was in his early 20s. I think he was just after World War II. They were married for 75 years. They're an amazing power couple. Definitely a couple of goals. I would put Albert and Victoria above them in terms of historical couples, but the Carters are a great love story nonetheless. Did you ever watch The King? Which King? I'm not sure which King you mean there, Seth. Yes, mental health advocacy was her big thing. She was the first lady to ever bring attention to that, and she made sure that she actually, instead of budgeting for design and fine china and dining at the White House and all of these elegant things that are more ladylike, actually made sure to put resources into actual staff meetings where they actually focused on her mental health advocacy. So she was not just lying in the water doing nothing or just chilling. I did a series of videos at the beginning of October celebrating President Carter, his 100th birthday. I did a long-form video biography of him, but I also did a president series before then, and that included Jimmy Carter. But I also did a video about Rosalind and her impact, and it's something people don't know about as much as they should, which is why I also do a series occasionally where I talk about did you know? Like, did you know that this thing in history was actually this? Um, Yeah, I think that Otter, that's fun. I like to interact with the community. That's why I do the live streams. It's like I said before, it's me giving back to you guys. You guys come, you ask questions. After watching my content during the week, hopefully you guys have questions about different historical topics and social studies and things like that. You bring it to my attention. We talk about it, and we have a lot of fun. And I want to keep doing that, and I think I'm going to max out at 3 with the weekend live streams. But I think that once I get into a groove of doing screencasts, streaming, and long form videos, and once I master iMovies and things like that, I think we'll be doing more of that. It's all about also finding more professional ways to record the content, because I mean, doing the content in kind of more casual ways is easy for short form, hard for long form. So it's getting more and more adapted. It's getting more equipment and technology on our side and things like that. And we're doing that slowly but surely. But I don't want to stop doing the live streams because I want to connect with you guys. And I want to do that on social media too. So maybe I'll do one live stream a week and on Facebook or something like that. Hello, welcome. Thank you. I'm sure you're very cute too. Can't tell. But Otter, your ideas are great. And I definitely I think I can do all of it. I just need to balance time out. Steph's saying it's about Henry V and the Battle of Agincourt. I watched the movie, but I heard it wasn't historically accurate. Yeah, a lot of people don't understand the War of the Roses and Henry V. He's definitely one of those great transformational figures and rulers who, if he had lived a lot longer, could have done a lot more. It's been amazing. He was only king for 9 years, yet he conquered all of France. He's the only English king to rule over Paris because he conquered it. It would have been really fascinating to see what would have happened with England under his rulership. You probably wouldn't have had Joan d'Arc and the Dauphin, the future Charles VII, getting as far as they did. But who knows? Henry V was a really powerful king, a really great king. And he's kind of like that JFK in England, where he didn't rule that long. He died young. Would have been very interesting to see where he was going, because he died when he was just starting to get good. And Agincourt, of course, is the most important battle in English-French history, probably. Do you ever have battles as topics? Yeah, well, I mean, we talk about it on the live stream. Sometimes I'll do different videos on battles. That would be a good series, historical battles. I think I would really enjoy that. There's so many important historical battles. I don't like female rulers. I don't think I could ever get through all of them. Could never be a comprehensive, exhaustive one. But Matt, I like your thinking. That might be, because I always do a poll where I ask, what do you want to see me do next for my series? That might be one of the options I give: historical battles. Yeah, I wonder if there's a historical woman. I wouldn't call her a historical ruler, although I could do a video on her. I've done a few videos on Joan of Arc. She's always a fascinating character. Basically, a peasant girl supposedly has visions, and in these visions, the Lord and the Virgin Mary tell her to reconquer her land, and she basically she leads the French resistance. She becomes one of the main figures of the French army, and encourages the Dauphin to take control and to rule France and to kick the English out. We sometimes overestimate how much she does, because she's a young girl leading a bunch of men, and she has some successful victories against the English. The English eventually do capture her, and because she says she heard voices from God, they put her on trial, determine she's a witch, and burn her at the stake, like they did with plenty of women that they didn't believe back then, unfortunately. But yeah, and eventually the church kind of changes its mind and says, yeah, she was hearing God, that was true, and God wanted her to free France from the English, so she is a saint. Now she's Saint Joan of Arc. But interestingly enough, I think that her story is a little bit exaggerated because of her unique status. When you have someone who is in a unique historical position like Joan of Arc, you're going to see her position exaggerated more because she's so unique. So because she's a woman leading men into battle, because she's fighting for her country's freedom, because she's so young, because she's just a peasant girl, because she claims to have these religious visions, all of these becauses, she is actually going to get more historical attention because she's so anomalous. I don't think she's as huge of a leader as We think she led the French in several successful battles. The major leader of the French forces was the hesitant but very competent Charles VII, the Dauphin, who became king and proved to be one of France's greatest monarchs ever. And if you want to learn more about him, check out Spectrum, one of the best history channels out there. Spectrum has an amazing list of the French kings, and he talks about Charles VII and Joan of Arc a little bit. But I think that Charles VII deserves more credit in that situation. Joan is really amazing. Not taking anything away, but I think we blow her up a little bit because she's so unique. Yeah, so I can't get to all of them, but I can talk about battles that maybe I can do 10 battles that changed the world. The Bulge, D-Day, but that's just modern. Agincourt, the Battle of Toursalles, or sorry, Austerlitz, where Napoleon shocked the whole world. And I'm just talking about modern European. There are incredible battles in India between the Mughal and the Persian Safavid Empire, which you've probably never heard about, during the 15 and 1600s. There are huge battles in Islamic history. The Battle of Tours and Poitiers is obviously very important. I'm trying to remember the victory Saladin had. I'm blanking. There's huge battles throughout all of history, and we couldn't possibly get to. Maybe I would have to do an ancient, modern, medieval, something like that. So, I don't know a lot about the French catacombs. I would imagine catacombs mostly are built underneath churches and cathedrals. France has a lot of cathedrals, therefore lots of catacombs. So that would be my best guess, Seth. I don't know enough about that topic to actually speak more on it as an authority. And something I like to do, I'd like to be as transparent as possible. I'm more than willing to be corrected. I'm more than willing to be wrong. And I'm always learning about things. I didn't know what Unit 731 was before I started doing these live streams. But when people actually told me what it was and I did more research, I was astounded to find out what there was there. So as I go on, I learn more and I grow as a historian because of you guys, because you bring up stuff. I would imagine you have a long history of kings, of nobility in France. You have a French monarchy going back longer than any other monarchy in Europe, except of course that it ended. But for French monarchy until its end was the oldest in Europe, with trace dates around 500 when Clovis, the first Frankish king, converts to Christianity and forces his subjects to do the same, which was quite common in the Dark Ages and early medieval period. And so because you have such royalty that needs to be buried, you have their remains being preserved and highlighted, as is common throughout history. I mean, in ancient Egypt, the tombs are for the pharaohs. You're going to more likely than not find the remains in the tombs and of rich and powerful people, priests, and especially rulers throughout history. And because you have such an extensive line of kings and queens, you burying them underground was common at that time. That's why there's so many catacombs in France. Yeah, that Matt, those are all exceptional battles, and that's not mentioning again the Eastern battles that are extremely important in history that we don't talk about, and that's not to mention the two battle. I'm trying to remember the name of them, but the battles where Japan was able to defeat the Mongols and keep China from ever taking over Japan. You obviously have the Battle of the Marco Polo Bridge, where China invaded Japan, causing World War II to begin. Yes, I said it. World War II begins in 1937. So yeah, you have huge battles all throughout history, all over the place, that we don't talk about nearly as much as we should. And maybe that's a series for me to do. And if I can do one video a day for a month, that's 30 battles right there. And if I do 2 videos a day of 2 battles, that's 60 in a month. So maybe that'll be something I can turn my attention to in December, in the year, talking about battles and stuff. Anyways, we are getting near our hour time. We're going to wrap it up because I know it's already almost midnight on the East Coast. And I know for some of the people who joined us from all over, from Europe and other parts of the world, which I always appreciate seeing people from those parts of the world, it's much later. But I really appreciate everyone's contributions. They're great questions and topics. And be sure to like and subscribe. Check out some of the daily content I've got dropping. The Sino-Japanese War, the Second Sino-Japanese War, I consider to be part of World War II. And yes, always a pleasure to see you, Seth. Always a pleasure to see all of you guys. I will be back tomorrow. We will be on time. We'll be starting at 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturday for part 2 of the Q&A. Looking forward to seeing you all there. Have a great night and keep up the history. Take care. Bye-bye.